Hi, this is Meredith Lego, and I'm doing a series of channeled teachings on ascension science and ascension mechanics. Right now, I am sharing some content that I've been able to channel from a collective consciousness of beings, about 9 beings or so, who are basically providing advice on different aspects of consciousness. They tend to be very different in tone and content than another being who I primarily channel, who is Ascended Master Hilarion. And they usually just start to provide content. So I'm going to continue on with sharing some additional tidbits of information that I've gotten them, trying to keep these videos relatively shorter. Because their channeling actually tends to be relatively shorter. But if you're new to this channel, I highly encourage you to go back to the very beginning, because it basically sets a building block of different content that kind of presents itself almost like a textbook where you're trying to get some of the foundational material, and then it starts to build with content over time. So with that, let me share what this particular message was from this collective consciousness. This particular one actually gets into a little bit of a controversial topic, and I was not expecting it when it was going to come in. But they did start to address content that really didn't so much have to do with the ascension process, but more of some things that are going on with the collective of humanity, and sort of giving an update around it. And it has to do with human trafficking, specifically around child human trafficking. So again, it did come up, so I just wanted to alert you to that fact. So the way that the information started coming in, and I'll read it verbatim and then kind of unpack my personal opinions of what they're trying to say, so it started: small children float free in the summer breeze of freedom. Haste to the end of suffering for many who elected this contract to both wake up humanity and fulfill a karmic cause-effect pattern. Pray for their recovery. Send thoughts of healing and unconditional love. So let me pause right there. So, obviously it started as sort of just a general statement about small children starting to float free more in the summer breeze. But then essentially what they said is that there is an ending to the suffering of many who elected this contract to both wake up humanity and fulfill a karmic cause-effect pattern. So in this particular case, and this would go back to a series of videos that I did on preparing for incarnational life, we tend to, as souls, set up different contracts or lesson plans, if you will, of what it is that we would like to accomplish as a purpose, and or oftentimes that can involve teaching and or learning in a particular lifetime. And oftentimes that may not be entirely what your ego personality wants to do, but it's what your soul wanted to do. And so if you're not sort of getting on with the program of getting done in that particular lifetime what the soul wants to do, you actually, prior to coming into incarnation, can set up multiple exit points. And some of those exit points might actually, and when I say exit points, backing up a bit, that means death. So you actually set up several options for exiting the life, well in advance of actually coming into life. And so again, if you're not getting on with the soul plan, you might just, your soul or your higher self might just go ahead and take an exit point. And again, it's usually never what the ego personality wants to do, but it's what the soul or higher self believes is in the best and highest good for that particular moment, in order to sort of redirect getting on with the goals or objectives of the higher self in terms of development of the soul over time. And so what they are essentially saying, again, this collective consciousness is saying, is that there are many beings who actually elected to take on a contract of being part of human trafficking as a child, which obviously nobody would ever in their right mind want to do, or um, wish that on anybody or any child. But these beings apparently elected to go through that process for the purposes of teaching. So in other words, to wake up humanity and or to fulfill a karmic cause-effect pattern. So this could go back to previous lifetimes that the particular soul experienced, and perhaps the shoe is on the other foot. So sometimes when we go into incarnations, it's almost like we're actors in a play. And, when you're obviously in it, it doesn't feel that way. But again, you're taking a higher multidimensional perspective where in one life you would choose to be a victim with a particular person or a particular group. And in another life, you turn around and play the perpetrator. And oftentimes what you're doing is you're sort of balancing back sort of energies that have been kind of given back and forth in that particular life. We kind of call it karma, but it's a working off of energy exchanges. And that's essentially, what's happening. So that could be playing out with some of these, children, victims that have experienced it. Unfortunately, what it comes down to is a victim-victimizer programming that's been running through our collective consciousness that we're hopefully starting to overcome. But essentially, that's what they're saying. So again, they're saying pray for the recovering, send thoughts of healing and unconditional love. And like everybody else in this world, I certainly do pray for the healing of these young children. It's very unfortunate, and I hope that they are able to move on with peace. The next thing that they get into is they kind of did a quick break with me, because they basically said switch off your right brain and move to journal any initial thought that comes to be as a thought form. Don't question it. So what was happening as I was hearing this come in, as I was starting to I think it was more the left brain that they were talking about, but I was starting to essentially go into a logical analysis of what I was hearing. So oftentimes when I'm doing this particular work, I have to move the ego personality out of the way, which means completely letting go of analysis of the content and just let it flow in. So I was starting to analyze the content a little bit, and they were kind of like getting me to move out of that. Next thing they said is that time has come for the freeing of many from the veiling. And this actually matches a teaching that was provided in the last video that I did. The fire that dwells within the heart will free the nations, which I think is a very powerful statement. So again, the time has come for freeing of many from veiling. The fires that dwell within the heart will free the nations. So I have to imagine that, as many of us have started to learn more about human trafficking in general, and especially children human trafficking, obviously that touches a chord in the hearts of many. So if that's what some of the children did, kind of said, I'm willing to take on this horrific experience in order to help wake up humanity, it certainly has lit a fire within the hearts of humanity to say no more. We don't consent to that. We don't consent to that behavior. So then I asked a question, so is all of the child trafficking ended? I was curious based upon, what they had talked about with the first paragraph. And they said not all, but certainly a majority has been impacted. Lessons have been learned by many, and for some, many lives will be needed to heal the emotional suffering. So what that means is that for some of these children who did go through this experience, whether they signed up for it or unfortunately were kind of suckered into it from a soul path development, or manipulated more, I should say, into it from a soul path development. Obviously, it's created an enormous amount of emotional suffering within the emotional, mental bodies, and likely had an effect upon the actual physical DNA etheric blueprint and the formation of future DNA patterns within the being. And so essentially what they're saying is that unfortunately many future incarnational lives will be needed to sort of heal and work off the emotional suffering that they did experience. So if they did in fact agree to go into this incarnation to help wake up humanity, that's an enormous service that they've done, because it's going to have enormous consequences, obviously, on working that off. Not necessarily from a karmic perspective, but more from a healing perspective. So that's the primary content that they offered around the children trafficking. At the end of that particular session, I did ask a question, and maybe this will be helpful for you if you experience this, but there was something that was not agreeing with my stomach over that particular month, and I didn't know what it was. Like, I had a constant low unsettling in the stomach area, and they basically said, dairy, your DNA is changing and your body will begin to reject certain foods that no longer serve you as a crystalline light being. So oftentimes, we will see changes in our eating patterns as we're going through this and as more energies are coming in, and some of it can literally just be because our DNA is starting to shift, and our body requires or necessitates less of some food and more of other foods. So that was just a piece of advice, and maybe you've been going through some of the same things, so I thought I'd pass that on at the end of that little session there. So that's really, there wasn't a lot to that particular session, but obviously it touched upon a very heavy and unfortunate topic, and unfortunately for the souls who have gone through it, but fortunately it's helped to raise awareness within humanity that this has been going on, so that we have the ability to actually do something about it. On a side note, I also want to mention that over my awakening process, I've been very fortunate to remember multiple past lives, somewhere in the range of 30 to 40. And 2 of them have actually been in the role of being a victim of child trafficking and child sex. Really, it's child sex trafficking. So I have enormous empathy for the experience of what the children have gone through, but I also know that there was one particular life that I had to go through that experience in order to sort of take ownership over no longer being a victim. So in one particular life, it was in the 14th century in Singapore, and my parents actually sold me into a brothel at the age of 11 or 12 because they didn't have enough money to survive. Obviously, you can imagine what happened at a brothel, but essentially I ended up overdosing of a heroin overdose at the age of 18. I'm sure in that life it created a lot of trauma for my emotional body, because not only does that bring up a whole bunch of abandonment issues within the etheric blueprint and the memory of the body, but obviously there was a lot of sort of suffering and trauma that happened. And in another life, I was put into a similar test, if you will, or a similar situation. And in this particular case, I was with a group of girls, excuse me, and it was somewhere in the European, I don't know, it seems to be like the 16th or 17th century. But I had the opportunity to take an out. I basically had the opportunity to escape from that situation. I tried to take some of the girls with me, but many of them refused because they were scared of getting caught. And I did get out. So I took accountability for the situation, took charge of it, and I realized a lot of these kids going through that didn't have that option. But when I did that, it actually ended the cycle of needing to go through that, because I was no longer willing vibrationally to be a victim anymore. Now, that created a different situation where I felt enormous guilt for having left those girls behind. And that wasn't actually healed until in this life I realized that it wasn't my guilt to carry. They had a free will choice to come with me. They could have. They elected not to. And I was carrying that guilt to the point that I had sort of nightmares about it, and about leaving girls behind. And I had no idea why. I had no context for what was causing that until I remembered this life and remembered the root cause of the guilt. And when that happened, the nightmares ended, essentially. So that's to say that, when I talk about this subject, I have, again, enormous empathy for what these kids have gone through, because I've experienced it in my soul journey as well. And, I pray that they don't have to go through this again. They did an enormous service for humanity in helping to wake us up. And I hope that within their healing journey, they can learn to have the opportunity to sort of break away if that were to ever happen again in a future incarnation. So with that, I know it's a heavy topic. I apologize for that, but I did want to share this particular message because I'm glad to hear that at least, many souls are sort of being freed from this, and that, hopefully we're coming more to an end of this horrific practice as a human race. So with that, I pass on lots of love, and I hope that you have a great rest of your evening. Thanks. Bye.